Hello again. Took a day off yesterday. Seemed initially like I was feeling good enough to have a reasonably productive evening, but something went awry. The chocolate yerba mate that I had backfired for some reason, as sometimes happens. I went into it in my YouTube live stream about why that may or may not happen, but ended up just bagging it and going to bed fairly early, even though I just laid in bed until 6 in the morning. But still working with my MacBook's photo booth here. Instead of going to the YouTube live stream for a safer video recording, I did delete some of the videos in the photo booth memory. Maybe that has something to do with it, and I rebooted photo booth. Close it and open it again. Maybe that'll help. Anyway, right to it. Chapter 10. These are their days. The present still holds varying moods for the Ihalmuit, and many are pleasant. These are the moods the people exploit and enjoy, and as for the others, they are put out of mind in the times when their presence is not felt in the flesh. One day, in the fall, there was a frost at Windy Cabin, and I began to look over my supplies of winter clothing. I had checked them over rather carefully before Andy and I left Churchill, but that had been several months earlier, and since that time I had looked at many things, and my eyes were beginning to see with the vision of my foster folk. Now I looked again at my long woolly underwear, 3 or 4 thick woolen sweaters, and my heavy blanket, capote. These things no longer seemed to offer the warmth and protection for which they were intended. After a while I put them all back in a box and hunted up Utek, my song cousin. Nipelo Aquaco, Utek remarked as I came upon him. Snow tomorrow. Yes, I believed him, and it was that forthcoming snow which had brought me to him. It was a delicate problem. I did not like to ask Utek outright for skin clothes. He would probably have disrobed on the spot, and while we were song cousins, my intimacy with the man had not extended to the point where I wanted to wear the clothes he had been living in all summer. I tried to be subtle. Utek, I said, I am told your mother is the finest maker of clothes in all the camps. Is that so? Utek did not take the bait. His natural modesty evidently extended to the work of his mother as well. He looked at me sadly. The old woman makes clothes that would fit well on a muskox. Who told you this monstrous lie? I tried a different tack. The snow will be here tomorrow, just as you say, I told him, and that may be all right for you, but we poor white men do not know how to dress in this land. We'll probably freeze. I shivered with appropriate emphasis and glanced at Utek to see how he was taking it all. This makes me think of a story about a South African tribe in another book from Daniel Quinn's reading list about the ways in which small tribes, in which people can be kept track of and can't sort of hide in numbers and behind media and image, how out-of-control egos are kept in check. And it was a story about gift giving and somebody giving a very large gift, giving a cow, I think, and immediately everybody's response was to make fun of the cow and insult the cow and say it was insufficient or diseased or flea-bitten, and it was an intentional tactic, like I said, to keep ego and narcissism in check, because that's a great danger in communities, as we know. And it looks like that's at work here with Utek and his mother. He was beaming. The text of his reply cannot be quoted, but the gist of it was that I had no need to fear from the cold, for Halmek, his wife, would be delighted to take care of the problem, and that care did not entail the making of clothes. This time I nearly gave up, but I decided on the last try I pulled out a plug of tobacco. I just got it. I was distracted by thinking that I'd mistaken Utek's mother for his wife. Oh yes, that Eskimo sharing of brides. I pulled out a plug of tobacco and said bluntly, "How many plugs for a suit of new winter furs?" I expected Utek to look hurt, but he beamed even more and told me the clothes would be ready in 2 weeks if the snow came that night. Work on winter clothes may not begin until after the first snow has fallen. 2 plugs of tobacco would be about right, and they would go to his mother, the one who would make clothes which might fit a musk ox, but hardly a man. Utek measured me on the spot, taking a length of rawhide line, and with it measuring waist, height, and arms. For each measurement he tied a knot in the cord, and when he was through, we set off for his camp to put in the order. Just lost one. Under 6 minutes. About ready to go to YouTube Live. But it's practice. The second reading might be better. Not that you'd know. You can't rewatch a corrupted file. Fall days in the camp under the little hills were short, for the sun was losing its place in the sky as winter approached. At Utek's camp, the white pavement of ancient deer bones was carpeted with the fall-killed hides of buck deer. Perhaps 50 of these were staked out or held stretched with stones at their edges, and the bluish tint of fresh skins was fading in the gray-white of dried hides. The scars of warble flies dotted the skins like smallpox eruptions. But the little pockets of larvae, which begin to swell in the fall, had been carefully scraped away along with the remnants of fat and tissue. Ihalmuit came from her tent and selected one of the hides, which was nearly dry. She examined it with great care, testing the hair to make sure it was firm in the skin. Then she took it back to the tent and, squatting by the smoke of the fire, made ready to tan it. The tanning of hide for clothes is simple. All that Ihalmuit had to do with the stiff, untreated skin was to work it between her hard hands until it grew soft. Then it could be cut to the pattern by Utek's mother and made part of a new winter outfit. All tanning is not quite so simple. The boots of the people must be made from caribou hide, and for boots, the hide from the neck of the buck is the thickest and best. This hide must be soaked in water for a long time until the hair rots from the skin, and the skin itself can be scraped with the curved woman's knife until it is as thin as good parchment. For the sole of the boot, the skin from the forehead of the deer is the toughest, though it is not nearly so tough as the sealskin soles the coast people use. Boots and clothes are still sewn with the fine sinews which lie in a broad band along the back of the deer, and Ihalmuit still does her sewing with delicate needles carved and filed from the shoulder blades of the deer. Her stitching is a miracle to behold. In order that the summer boots shall be waterproof, she must make the seams perfectly tight solely by virtue of her sewing. The stitches are often so fine they cannot be counted at all with the naked eye, and how Ihalmuit makes them is something no man can say. Not all boots are made in the same manner as these summer ones I have mentioned. For winter use, there are boots made with fur soles turned down so that a man will find a good grip on the ice. There are others, fur-lined throughout, and there are the fine and delicate slippers of fawn or hare to wear next to the skin. All this cleaning and preparing of hides, this making of boots and of clothes, is the work of the women, and in its season it is the work of their days. I have spoken only of a few of the things they must make. The full list is almost endless. Bags, buckets, ornaments, clothing, tents, kayaks, covers, and robes are but a few of the many things, the woman must make from Tuktu the deer. There is no lack of work to make the days full when the deer hides are prime. It was old Kala, Utek's mother, who made my suit of furs, my winter house, and she made them without seeing me from the time she began until she was done. Yet when Utek brought them to me, they fitted well. At 2 plugs of tobacco, she did not overcharge, for to show me her skill, she had inserted pure white inserts of belly skin over the whole of the outside parka, in a pattern which combined grace and beauty with the most remarkable blending of fur. The days in the camp of Utek held room for a great many skills as fine as those displayed by old Kala. The family was a well-regulated one, and work did not seem a burden even to those who had the most to do. For one thing, it was the particular task of Kala, as the eldest one of the family, to keep the cook fire and fuel. Daily, the old woman walked out from the camps, and sometimes her search took her 10 miles over the land before she found a willow thicket which met her needs. Then she would cut and tie up a tremendous bundle of twigs and carry this bundle home on her back. Yet what was a 20-mile walk for old Kala? There was plenty to enjoy on the way. There, a herd of fat does grazing high on the slope of a hill, fine beasts with sleek velvet coats. Or Ala, the long-tailed duck, calling its woman's gossip loudly from the edge of a pond. Perhaps Kala might flush a ptarmigan from its well-hidden nest, and the half-developed eggs make her a welcome snack during the walk. Often, if there was no fuel close at hand, the camp's children went with her. At Nalik, the orphaned son of Utek's sister would carry his little toy sling and stubbornly chase the alert birds of the ridges, the snow buntings, the long spurs, and sometimes he would come proudly back to old Kala with his tiny catch held high in his hand. If she went alone to her search, there were memories enough to keep Kala happy. Rich memories, those of old Kala. She who had known 3 husbands and a dozen children in her time, had seen Tyrell, the first white man, come to the river, and knew all the tales of 3 generations of men. Kala gathered the fuel, sewed clothes for her son, kept the fires burning, and, not least of her tasks, made acid comments on the way her son and his wife ran their lives. Some things never change. That is an old woman's privilege, one the Ihalmuit do not refuse to the old. Perhaps one day Utek fails to bring in fresh meat when it is needed, and so he must accept the tongue-lashing of his old crone. Nor will he grow angry at her, but he will laugh a little bit sheepishly, shake his head, and reply, "Mother, I shall do better tomorrow, and you shall have a fine, fresh marrowbone to worry away at with your old teeth." To call back to one of my points from another chapter, it seems like that criticism of hard work and good gifts is also a way to build gratitude. Even if you're living in a culture where practice of gratitude comes much more easily. In the camps of the people, the days of an old woman are full in the summer. And though she works, she is not driven as old people may often be in other lands. She has her time to gossip and to visit the nearby camps, and she has both the right and the freedom to speak out against the ways of her children, and of their children too, while she lives. Well, her days are as they should be, for with the coming of winter the old woman's life is a pawn without value. If the winter be hard, and famine comes to the family, then the old one must die. It is something that all people know, but that is never spoken aloud. In summer, the old ones live their lives free of much of the restraint which lies on the younger ones of the people. In winter, youth may turn to age and call on it to walk into the night and never return. For Ihalmuit, too, life can be pleasant enough. In the summer of 1947, she bore a child, Kalak, and it was a great happiness to her that this child was born. 3 other children, small heaps of rocks over their bones, had not seen the end of their first year in the land. But surely Kalak would live and do well. A fine, healthy child, she would eat and grow fat, for Ihalmuit was certain that in the winter ahead there would be much good meat laid out by in the caches about the camps. There was enough for Ihalmuit to do in the summer, and yet she had ample time for the pleasures of living. Although there was no clothing to make until fall, there were many pounds of nipku, dry meat, to attend to out on the hills. When the sun shone, the meat had to be. turned before the flies quite possessed it, and when rain threatened, the widespread slices of meat had to be quickly gathered and stored safely away. There were 5 meals a day to prepare for those of her tent, and perhaps 2 or 3 visitors from the tents of Ohoto or Hikwa. All these had to be fed. Soup 3 or 4 times a day, with plenty of fat and bone marrow melted in, and cold roasts or boiled meat for the other 2 meals. This was enough to keep everyone happy. The dogs were also in Ihalmuit's charge during the summer, but they were light work, for there were only 3 of the beasts, and these had to be obtained by Utek only that spring, for none of his own dogs had survived the starvation of the previous year. These 3 were young dogs, not yet broken to work with the sled, and so they still had the freedom of the camp. Despite the trouble they made for Ihalmuit, being great thieves, nevertheless they were never tied. The Ihalmuit look upon dogs much as they look upon people. The time of hardship and of bitter labor comes soon enough, both to men and to man's beasts. The Ihalmuit say, "While they're young, while life here is easy, let them find what joys they may. Let them be as free as all young things should be." So the dogs have no labors except when at Nalek hitches them a model sled behind one or the other of them, and makes the dog drag the sled in imitation of the real work it must soon learn to do. The dogs were well fed, fat animals of infinite good nature. It was not unusual to see one of them lying on its back while the naked child, Kalak, sprawled on the dog's belly, pummeling it with small hands, or pouring fistfuls of sand and grit into its gaping red mouth. Things would soon change for these dogs, but now they lived free lives, subject only to the sibilant hiss with which Utek warned them when they trespassed too far over the bounds. Ihalmuit's main labor was for the child she had borne. Each day she devoted long hours to Kalak, amusing the child, feeding her from her breasts at the first sign of hunger, bathing her with wet lumps of moss, or simply talking to her as all women talk to their young. In the camps of the people, the child is king, for childhood is short, and tragedy comes soon after. As it is with the dogs, so the early years of a child are made free of compulsion and of hard labors, for these years must always remain in the child's memory to alleviate the agonies which come with mature years. Maybe even if you live your life well, unlike Ivan Ilyich, you just have to go back to the memories of childhood. And you don't have to be a poet like Rainer Maria Rilke, imploring the artist to go back to memories of childhood when everything was glowing and glorious and inspiring to art. It had been said by people who should know better that Eskimos treat their children well only so the children will in turn treat their parents well when old age is upon them and their time of usefulness is at an end. In point of fact, the people treat their children with great sympathy and forbearance because they know so much of humanity. I remember once when Utek, who had agreed to stay with us for a couple of weeks, left Windy Camp to walk 60 miles over the tundra simply to assure himself that Kalak was well and happy. Then he turned and retraced the 60 miles, arriving back at our camp 5 days after he left it. When he arrived back, he was contrite that he had been forced to leave Andy and me, and he apologized because he had been so weak in his concern for his child. Again, I remember one day when I was talking to him about children, and I expressed surprise that no Ihalmuit child knows corporal punishment even when the provocation is great. I spoke casually, but Utek replied with vehemence, for it seemed he was honestly puzzled that I should not know why a child is never beaten. "Who but a madman would raise his hand against blood of his blood?" he asked me. "Who but a madman in his man's strength would stoop to strike a child against the weakness of a child? Be sure that I am not mad, nor yet is Ihalmuit afflicted with madness." Now I'm thinking of so many stories of poor fathers and absentee fathers in our culture. Father issues and being unloved by fathers, parents generally, but it seems like fathers in particular. And fathers who wouldn't walk 60 miles to go see if their child is well, but would, and then back another 60 miles, but would walk 60 miles to quote-unquote get cigarettes and then never walk the 60 miles back. There was something that might have been contempt in his voice as he spoke, and I never again raised that question. So the children live their lives free of all restraint, except that which they themselves impose, and they are at least as well behaved as any children anywhere. For 3 years after birth, the child is suckled, and by the time it has been weaned, it is already aware of the general pattern of its life. I told you of Kakami, who at the age of Cooney, well, that's a real slip, who at the age of 5 was already an accomplished woman of the people. Yet Cooney had never been taught what she must do. She was simply observant and imitative, as most children are, and she saw what others did and longed to do as well by herself. Gotta once again recommend Gene Liedloff's book, The Continuum Concept, not only because it's a great counterpoint to tropical culture of native peoples and not an Arctic culture, but of the hands-off and incredibly effective way of raising children that doesn't nearly kill parents with exhaustion as we see as normal in our culture. The children's work is also their play. At night, when the adults are asleep or resting on the ledge, no voice is raised to chide the girl children, who remain active until the dawn, keeping the fire alive under the cooking pot and concocting broths and stews, not with toy things, but with the real equipment which will be theirs in maturity. No regimen or hard routine is laid upon them. When they are sleepy, they sleep. When they are hungry, may always eat, if there is food. If they wish to play, no one will halt them and give them petty tasks to do, for in their play they learn more of life than can be taught by tongues and by training. Yeah, again, I think of the continuum concept in our culture. When you have a culture that where the adults are clearly deserving of respect, clearly understand the way the world works, clearly are benefiting the community around them, they're looked up to by the children, and the children almost invariably want to imitate them, to be like the adults, and even the older children who are at deeper stages of development. When I think about our culture, where not only, as the geopolitical strategist Peter Zeihan says, that in cities children become not helpful, but more like expensive mobile furniture. In our culture, adults are frequently kind of sad to children. Their adults are unhappy and they're a generation out of touch, and they're not seen as worth imitating, because they seem more like often cogs in a pointless machine. And you add to that what children see from having so many other people that they might run into who are part of different subcultures who might be more worth imitating, or ridiculous, unreal images in movies and television of superheroes who can't be imitated in any real sense, and who make the adults that otherwise might be naturally imitated seem paltry and laughable, particularly once you hit puberty and the teenage years. But when children genuinely look up to the older children and the adults, you don't really need school, and again, raising children becomes almost easy, not the exhausting, expensive task that takes so many employees, teachers, and babysitters, and almost kills parents with exhaustion as such a rule or thumb that it's almost a joke. Suppose the youth, a 10-year-old boy, decides he will become a great hunter. Overnight. He is not scolded and sent sulkily to bed for his foolish presumption, nor do his parents condescend to his childish fantasy. Instead, his father gravely spends the evening preparing a miniature bow, which is not a toy, but an efficient weapon on a reduced scale. The bow is made with love, and then it is given to the boy, and he sets out for his distant hunting ground, a ridge perhaps 100 yards away, with the time-honored words of luck ringing in his ears, which are the same words spoken by the people to their mightiest hunter when he sets out over the 2-month trip northward for the muskox. Then there is no distinction, and this lack of distinction is not a pretense, it is perfectly real. The boy will be a hunter? Very well then, he shall be a hunter, not a boy with a toy bow. What a fascinating experience must have been as a child instead of as a child really only having the opportunity. I mean, you play, but it's not really to imitate work. I never had the opportunity to I didn't see what my father was doing, and with grave respect from my father and his friends, go out and attempt to work at Kilfasset Farms or an imitation thereof, or Ben & Jerry's, or Cabot Creamery. Not that I really could have. It would have been fascinating if my father hadn't been denied, as so many men are, the opportunity to go out and communally hunt or solitarily hunt for food for the family. Again, a much more evolutionarily ingrained experience, but also just that experience of being treated like an adult and exposed to the incredible benefits of failure and the humbling education of being treated in ways that build gratitude. I find myself thinking of the combination of that lack of experience as a youth and my sort of gentle nature, and the results in the challenges that I have as an adult, being like Rocky in the movie Rocky, and truly deeply understanding the value of staying on my feet until the final bell being death. And I'm sure there's a god that will be described, one of the gods of the people later on, that's their version of death. Maybe Paija. And I won't describe Paija, but pretty terrifying when I get to it. If the child is brave enough, he may search the ridges and valleys through the hours of summer twilight, which span the interval from dusk till dawn. When he turns at last, with hunger gnawing at his stomach, he is greeted as gravely as if it were his father. The whole camp wishes to hear of his hunt, and he can expect the same ridicule at failure, or the same praise if he managed to kill a little bird, which would come upon a full-grown man. So he plays and learns under no shadow of parental disapproval, and under no restraint of fear. The evenings are the best times in the summer camps. The men return from hunting over the plains, from building a new kayak, or perhaps from spearing lake trout at the rapids on the river. Hunger is satisfied. The old ones sit in the place of honor about the fires with the willow sleeping mats beneath their bony hams. Husbands and wives speak of the day's events. The children drift in from the outlying shadows, hoping to hear the tales that may be told of other times. Here is at Nalek, who has learned a new string figure, cat's cradle, we should call it, during the day, and now he must show it to his family. He fumbles it, knots the string by accident, and joins in the general good-natured laughter at his clumsiness. But everyone has caught the infection now, and lengths of sinew appear in everyone's hands. The space about the fire becomes a flashing spiderweb of thin gut strings, as young and old hands play at the ancient game. Now Ihalmuit makes the figure of the two fighting wolverines. All the rest of the company stops to watch the battle of the two wolverines in the figure, and Utek provides a realistic two-way sound effect to make the fight all the more vivid. At last the loop collapses. One of the figures vanishes, and the victorious Wolverine slides down the string and also disappears. Utek goes on to relate the story of the ground squirrel that slept, as it is recorded in the stylistic figures of the shapes he weaves from string. Even old Kala bends her stiff fingers painfully to create the figure of Kumanik Ankuni, the Great Lake. The figures go on endlessly, and there is shouting when a new one appears, and laughter when an old one is fumbled. Suddenly the three dogs that have been watching the proceedings with puzzled interest break into high-pitched and puppyish yowls, announcing the coming of old Hikwa. Hammock stirs up the fire so the soup will heat, for a visitor, even if he comes only from the next tent, must always be fed at once. It is a rare night when someone does not come to visit. Often the entire population crowds around one fire, and at such a time perhaps Hikwa will heed the patient pleading in the black eyes of silent children, and will begin a tale. I remember in past readings of this book, before I felt more sort of damaged and cynical, thinking about the joy it must have been sitting around communally around the fire with this kind of bonding, and to genuinely, with every fiber of your being, want to be there, and to not feel like you want to get home, or to just be by yourself or with your partner, to get home, to turn on your Netflix queue and watch TV and lie in bed. I see so many jokes now about, online, about people get older and they just want to be home. They don't want to go out. They're at a party and they don't want to be at the party. They want to bail early. And again, that was part of the reason that I went to Sirius in Massachusetts, and sort of a desire for that. But again, it was people who'd been raised in a civilized way, generally, trying clumsily to recreate that, and it just didn't, if you're not raised from birth like that in a true tribal community, it takes a lot of effort to get it to be more than a pale imitation. There were a few times when, fire pits and sitting around the fire pit, but still, there was just that sort of itch in it because it wasn't regular enough to be routine, and there were too many other things to do, home to get back to. It takes much more regular activity of a certain kind and with people to build deep-seated hardwiring and emotions and bonding. This is Kiviok, and I will tell you about, and Kiviok was a wandering man. He was the grandson of Tuktoriak, the spirit of the deer, and that is why he was wandering man. It is told that Kiviok once lived far to the west of here, somewhere by a great lake that even I have never seen. Kiviok was a young man then, and he lived with his parents. But one day, when Kiviok was away hunting muskox, Ijaka, the half-men from the northeast, came on the camp and cut the life from his mother and father, and left him alone in the land. So Kiviok took his kayak and paddled south down the shores of the lake until he came to a channel between two great mountains. When he drew close, he saw that these were not two mountains, but the two jaws of a gigantic bear. And the jaws opened and shut without ceasing, and the crash of the enormous white teeth was as loud as the thunder of Kyla. But Kiviok was not afraid, and he waited until the jaws just started to open, and then he dashed with his kayak through the channel. The big jaws of the bear closed at once, and they chopped off the stern part of the kayak, but Kiviok escaped. Now Kiviok came to a new land in the south, where he found a tent with a woman and her daughter Ularik. Kiviok slept with the daughter, and she was his wife, and for a time all went well. But it came about that the old woman grew jealous, and wished Kiviok to be her husband. She waited until Kiviok had gone off on a hunt. Then she offered to braid her daughter's hair. She pretended to fix the tugli, the wooden ornaments in the hair of her daughter, but instead she wound the hair around the girl's throat and choked her to death. Then she took her sharp ulu and skinned the girl's face and pulled the skin right over her own ancient head. This is a hell of a story to be telling around a fire for children. Oh boy. When Kiviak came home from his hunt, he went to bed with the old woman, thinking she was his wife. But as it happened, he had got wet during the day, and the moisture shrunk the false skin on the old woman's face, so that it all split and came off. When Kiviak saw how he had been tricked, he jumped into his kayak and fled. He came to a place where there was a muskox who talked like a man, and the muskox offered Kiviak his daughter, if the man would stay with him and defend the muskox from the wolves. But Kiviak said, "Your daughter is too hairy to come into my bed," and he fled away in his kayak again. Kiviak traveled on, and many strange things happened to him, and he saw many strange things. But all at once he found himself back on the great lake where his parents had lived, and he saw that a party of Ijaka stood on the shore waiting for him to land so they could kill him. Kiviak stayed in the kayak, and he called out, "Hey there, you half-men! Come into the water and fight!" The Ijaka were so angry that they swam out into the lake, but Kiviak dived into the water and swam underneath them, stabbing them all in their bellies, so that they died. That is the story of Kiviak, the wandering man, and of his fight with Ijaka. I don't know any more about him. After Hikwa had finished, there will be other tales by other people. Old Kala may tell her favorite story of the man who had 5 wives who turned into lemmings one winter night. And so it goes, for there are hundreds of these tales in the minds of the people, and though they have been told many times, the listeners never grow weary of hearing them again. I mentioned home and community, that kind of simple community we retreat into, and I mentioned Netflix and how many stories and jokes I've heard about. People thinking they want the new stories, not told by people that they're close to, but by Netflix, and just turning on Friends or The Office and letting those old stories go on autoplay, stories they've heard so many times. If several visitors come of an evening, then Utek will take his great hoop drum down from the poles of the tent, and after holding it over the fire so that the gut will be stretched taut by the heat, he will offer it to one of the visiting men. The men are modest, and the drum will be passed from one to the other, until at last one of them, a Hoto perhaps, will take it. He gets up from the squatting circle of people and walks to the center of the group, hard by the fire. For a while he stands there, embarrassed, and the audience shouts and argues about what song he should sing. At last a Hoto says, "Very well then, all you with big noisy voices, I will sing my own song, the one I composed in honor of myself as a hunter." He holds the drum by the handle and twirls it around and around, striking it lightly along the edge of the hoop with a stick. The tempo begins as a slow rhythmic beat, and a Hoto begins to shuffle around, looking like a trained bear at a circus. He bends sharply forward from the waist, and suddenly he begins singing his song. It goes something like this. "Oh, indeed, I am a mighty hunter of deer, out on the plains where the rocks are. But with my little eyes, like the lemmings, I can hardly tell the deer from the rocks, and with my weak arms, like a snowbird's, I cannot shoot an arrow straight from my bow, out on the plains where the rocks are. Nevertheless, I go out onto the plains, out on the plains where the rocks are, and I shoot my arrows into the rocks, for some day one of the rocks may be a deer. Then indeed I will be a great hunter, out on the plains where the rocks are." You know, it's almost like there are a lot of rocks in the Barrens, you know? At the end of each verse, the audience takes up the time-honored chorus, and the listeners sway in their places with their eyes tightly shut as they cry out the chant. Ay-ya-ya-ya-ya, ay-ya-ya-ya-ya, ay-ya-ya-ya-ya. Ahoto shuffles about more and more quickly. The sweat pours from his face as the dim glow of the light fire sends his distorted shadow slithering in and out among the rocks by the fireplace. The tempo increases, and when all the verses of the song have been sung, Ahoto collapses limply in his place, and this drum is taken up by another. The song goes on for hours. Most of the songs are of self-derision, or perhaps sarcastic songs directed at a notorious coward or a lazy hunter. No man praises himself, and when he sings of himself, he always appears in the song as a fool. For as a man who is inadequate in the ways and skills of a hunter or of a lover. Even 10-year-old Atnalik has invented his own song, and he's encouraged to sing it, while his elders chant the chorus with particular gusto, and loudly applaud him when he is done. The first thing that comes to mind in terms of music is how famous rap songs are for the complete opposite of this, making oneself out to be amazing, not a fool, and to be more than adequate and filled with skills as a hunter of money or as a lover of women. Ego and elevated narcissism and that trap for the soul. Clearly the hearts and souls of the people have benefited from being self-deprecating. Only the women do not sing their songs, for this is taboo while the men are present, but they carry the burden of the chorus, and their high-pitched voices chant in the darkness like the unearthly voices of spirits. The night passes quickly. Games, songs, and stories fill the hours until the sun is again on the upsweep of its course in the round, white belly of the dawn sky. The people eat a little and then go to sleep, all together up on the willow mats of the ledge. In winter, the great length of the nights passes in the same pleasant manner. This is the time when the almost continuous darkness and cold could well drive men mad, but it is also the time of the greatest song feasts. Then song cousins visit each other's camps, and they give valuable presents and receive presents as valuable in return. Song cousins contest with each other in good-natured rivalry in the singing of songs to the accompaniment of the drum. Many new songs are composed and sung in the igloos in winter. But songs alone do not fill the nights. There is a wide variety of games, and of these gambling games are the most interesting. The favorite gambling sport of the Ihalmuit is, like so many things in their culture, almost indistinguishable from an Indian counterpart. To play it, the two men or two teams of men face each other over the expanse of a robe. The dealer has a stone or some other small object concealed in his hand, and very rapidly he places that hand under the robe, then under his backside as he squats on the ground, then behind his back, and finally he holds the clenched fist up in full view of his opponent. Instantly the second man must indicate where he thinks the object is. In the hand, under the buttock, behind the back, or under the robe. When, and if, he guesses correctly by putting his own hand in the corresponding spot, he becomes the dealer. The odds against him are 3-1, and he may lose just about everything he owns before he gets a chance to carry the ball. But then he usually wins everything back with interest. The game is played with such speed that it is almost impossible to follow the motions of the players, and if nothing else, it makes for a remarkable quickness of eye. This is the second time I've this tangent I'm about to do, because I did lose the last clip, but two thoughts about gambling. One, the more negative portrayal of it in 1984, where the proles are seen as distracting themselves with many simple-minded vices, and chief among those is gambling. But also I find myself thinking of Daniel Quinn's second book, The Story of B, where the magic in the spirit that some find in gambling is examined and put to light, put under the light of examination, and the sense that one gets of joy when winning a difficult gamble, when the luck truly works out in one's favor, is as if the gods have taken notice of you. And makes me excited for one of the most interesting chapters in this book that's coming up, where Mowat goes into the details of all the gods of the people. But also, I've never been particularly enthused with gambling. I've always preferred games of true skill and not the semi-illusory sense of skill and pattern recognition that comes from gambling, like slot machines in Vegas. I've always felt like certain kinds of gambling is you're in truth you're doing something a monkey could do and pretending that you can figure out the pattern. In other days, the Chippewyans used to hold gambling contests with their blood enemies, the Ihalmuit, on the narrow strip of land which divides their territories. I have heard the tale of one such game which lasted for 2 days and 2 nights without a break. The particular torment I speak of ended with the Eskimos holding the entire wealth of the Indians, and they had to level their rifles and spears at the losers to prevent what threatened to become a sanguinary battle. I found myself thinking about whether or not my breaks of character, my breaks of formality, are appealing, and I have recollections of Stephen Colbert very much in character in the Colbert Report on Comedy Central before he sold out to some extent to do The Late Show, and how, in spite of the really impressive nature of his character making fun of Bill O'Reilly, the disgraced Republican commentator, conservative commentator, the most entertaining moments were when he would make a mistake and he would break character and start laughing at himself. I guess the same thing applies to Jon Stewart. I don't know how much of that has to do with feeling a personal bond and love for this long-loved personality and fame, and whether I don't have the cachet and fame for anybody listening here. It's probably some of both. Among themselves, the Ihalmuit gamble with an eye to reality. They are well aware that a man who loses his rifle or his team of dogs will probably die of starvation, so it is custom for the winner to return most of what he has won at the conclusion of the game. Thus the loser suffers no hardship. He may even have the dubious pleasure of losing the same rifle 5 times over in the course of one evening of gaming. These are but a few of the pleasures which belong to the days of the people. Their most lasting pleasures come from the labors of creation. Old Hiqua at work is on a new kayak is a man who is lost in his task. He knows the exquisite pleasure of creating a thing he can love. He knows all of the subtle joys of fine craftsmanship as he delicately shapes the slender ribs of his craft. And it is only because he is in love with his labors that he can bring to completion this vessel so light and graceful. He has only tools that he makes for himself, using a bow drill constructed of a small bow, a wooden rod, and a fine point of metal. He drills tiny holes in the willow ribs of the kayak and laces them firmly to the flame with delicate lashings of rawhide. He prolongs the easy sweep of the little craft into a long, fragile beak supported by longitudinal stringers composed of dozens of short sections of spruce which have been intricately mortised and fitted together to make a piece of the requisite length. When the kayak frame has been finished, it looks like the exquisitely delicate skeleton of a great fish. It is a true work of art. Later, when it is covered with hides, Hiqua paints a brilliant design on its decks with colors he grinds from stone and mixes with the fat of the deer. At length the kayak will take to the water. It will live under the hand of old Hiqua and give him joy. The Ihalmuit do not fill canvases with their paintings, or inscribe figures on rocks, or carve figurines in clay or in stone, because in the lives of the people there is no room for creation of objects of no practical value. What purpose is there in creating beautiful things if these must be abandoned when the family treks out over the Barrens? But the artistic sense is present and strongly developed. It is strongly alive in their stories and songs, and in the string figures. But they also use it in the construction of things which assist in their living, and in these cases it is no less an art. The pleasure of abstract creation is largely denied to them by the nature of land, the land, but still they know how to make beauty. They know how to make beauty, and they also know how to enjoy it, for it is not an uncommon thing to see an Ihalmuit man squatting silently on a hill crest and watching, for hours at a time, the swift interplay of colors that sweep the sky at sunset and dawn. It is not unusual to see an Ihalmuit pause for long minutes to watch the sleek beauty of a weasel, or to stare into the brilliant heart of some minuscule flower. And these things are done quite unconsciously, too. There is no word for beauty as such in their language. It needs no words in their hearts.